There we go. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. My name is Yogesh Chavda, founder of Y2S Consulting, and I'm delighted to have Adam Bay from Panoplay here today with me. And we're going to talk about a topic that is starting to gain a lot of traction in the market research and the marketing world, and it's all about digital twins. So, first, before we get into all that, Adam, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Amazing. So, and with everybody, when I start off the show, I basically start by asking a very simple question, which is, tell us how you got here professionally.
Yeah. I guess for everyone, it's a weird and winding journey. But for me, I actually started out as a researcher, so as an academic, an anthropologist of science and technology and innovation. I did my PhD research mostly in China to understand how organizations and ecosystems and regions handled innovation. And I guess a through line in my career has been a continual fascination with everything that surrounds the technology itself that actually determines whether or not the technology gets adopted, whether it changes the world, or whether it fizzles. And so that extends from culture to process to bureaucracy to knowledge exchange. And as an academic, that's what I looked at. And then I had to call it like a one-third life crisis and sort of left, half left academic world after a postdoc and decided to help get a company called Nomadic Learning off the ground, which has since been sold. And the idea of Nomadic was small group learning at massive scale, where we transformed a lot of big corporate functions, largely marketing and sales functions, through small group learning experiences. And in that capacity, I helped transform IBM, marketing, PepsiCo, AB InBev, a lot of big companies. And I guess I realized something felt broken when it came to the intersection between, call it human insights, audience and market understanding, and the decisions that were being made. And so as Nomadic, which is the last company that's being sold, I was friends with Neil, who's the founder of this company, who's really ultimately like a brilliant product guy. And we thought, hey, maybe we can do better. So that's how I got to the industry.
Amazing, amazing. And you're totally right. Like everyone's got their long and winding pathway, and yours. I didn't realize you had actually worked and studied in China. That's pretty impressive as
Yes.
well. So, um, are you fluent in Mandarin? I'm just curious now.
Yeah, I'm fluent in Mandarin. I did my research in Mandarin, although I taught it was like a MIT Sloan program. So I taught in English, but the research was in Chinese.
Amazing, amazing. Well, more power to you, my friend. More power to you. So let's get into the conversation. The reason why you caught my eye a couple of months ago is that you published a white paper on digital twins, and you did an amazing job in kind of like giving a bit of a lay of the land on this space. I know there are a lot of people who have heard about digital twins. They don't know what digital twins are. So we'll get into definitions in a second. Um, I want to start by actually asking you what got you to wanting to publish this white paper, because it's a
Yeah.
good piece of work that you did. So let's start with that, and then we'll go to the definitions, and then we'll get into the conversation.
Yeah, it was a lot of work. And I think the white paper came out of, I mean, we've been doing this kind of work, digital twin or synthetic data related work for quite a while, actually. I mean, almost 3 years, which it doesn't isn't that long in the scheme of things, but is an eternity in the context of the progress of AI and evolution of AI capabilities. And I
Sure.
guess my job has always been to think about what the technology can do for organizations and the value that it can provide. Sounds simple, but of course, that's often the hard part. And in talking to brands, agencies, consultancies that we were working with about digital twins, the first question was always like, oh, it sounds cool, but what the hell are they? And number two, how can we trust them? And number
Mhm.
three, we heard all these other claims from other platforms. Are those true? Why aren't
Yeah.
you as good as those claims? And
Yeah.
then how do we even know if they're useful or valuable? Do we do parallel testing? Do we compare them to a human survey? Do
Yeah.
we do they have predictive power? And so what I realized very early is that I think the industry as a whole is driving very quickly towards a massive benchmarking and standards crisis. I think that for a long time, for good or for bad, although I'm not like a long-term sort of market industry guy, I've been interacting with it for a long time. There were standards around, manipulation of statistics, around sample and sample quality. Of course, we didn't always live up to those standards, but there was a sense of what good research looked like or what rigorous methodology looked like. Yeah. And now I think there's very little ground to stand on. So our idea was, if we want to, aspire to be a kind of anti-black box company where we're showing our work and we're actually helping clients to choose the right underlying data, to pressure test things like digital twins, and to demonstrate value in particular business cases, then we have to make the case for that level of care. Because it's not easy and it's expensive and it takes a while. So why not just go with something you find online or ChatGPT? So I started thinking like, hey, maybe we should create a white paper that's not particularly branded, that just explores the space as a whole, shares some of our client experiences, but actually tries at a very high level to put forth some broad standards that I think most people in the industry can agree on. So that was the impetus. We wanted to, of course, there was a marketing purpose, but we also wanted to do some service to the industry and push the conversation forward.
Yeah, and I think you did a brilliant job of giving something back to the industry in a way which is actually very helpful, actually, right? Because a lot of companies obviously want to do their marketing, but they skew it. In this case, I felt it was very balanced, right? So let's get into some of the definitions, because I think it's really important for us to level set, right? Tell us, digital twins have been around for a long time. This is not new, but it's new in the marketing and market research world. So tell us, how are you defining digital twins first and foremost?
Yeah. To me, the concept of digital twin is very much rooted in that history you're mentioning. And when I was studying philosophy of science and technology and so on, I was really fascinated by the idea of cybernetics, the idea that one could model in a simplified way a complex system, such that we could experiment on the system without burning the world down, right? To reduce risk while increasing knowledge of the system. And in order to do that, you need some kind of model that actually reflects the real world in some way. And so I was really fascinated at one point by GE's model of a digital engine from a jet engine from a plane, a real engine. And they created a digital twin of that jet engine so that aircraft mechanics could actually have something to experiment on and learn on, because obviously you don't want the mechanic like out on the wing messing with the engine while the plane's flying. And it's extremely expensive to put the engine out of service and not utilize it to make money. So you don't want the engine on the ground. So what do? Well, you need to model all of those complex systems and subsystems in the jet engine so that the mechanic can see what happens when he or she messes with a part of the engine, how it affects the other parts of the engine, and so on, right? And I love that idea that in a simplified way you could model a physical system in order to help train people, in order to provide a low risk environment to test and to anticipate the future. And you can say, people are not jet engines. They're much more complicated. We live in a complex environment where there are cultural and bureaucratic and technical systems that are all interacting. But I think the basic principle is the same, right? It's how do we create something that extends into virtual space, a system that exists in the real world, such that we can learn something about the real world. And I always like the quote of the English mathematician George Box, where he said something like, no model is correct. Some models are useful. So I always had that idea in the back of my mind. How do we create a digital twin of real people and real groups of people and real decision-making processes that's useful to people in organizations who need to make decisions? And that's really where we started.
Amazing. So to your point, you talked about the jet engine. I've seen lots of videos also online. You just type digital twins on YouTube, you'll see a bunch of videos there, of airports, for example, being designed into digital twins. Even I think the Rotterdam port was built into a digital twin at one point. So they could figure out optimization and things like that. So there are lots and lots of those kind of physical examples. But to move into the human space, right? Where we've been in a world of creating personas and 2D personas. And is this I've even heard people say, is a digital twin a 3D persona? Is that what you're really talking about?
Mm.
What do you mean? So you talked about a couple of things there around people, communities, and systems. So maybe do you want to delineate and tell us if is it a digital twin of a person or a community,
Yeah.
or how should we wrap our heads around that?
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of ways to think about digital twins, and another term that's often used in the industry is AI persona. And
Yep.
then, I mean, to me, this is quite different, but a lot of people conflate synthetic data, that category, with AI persona or digital twin.
Yeah.
And I should say these aren't like settled definitions in the industry, right? Like in uncertain times where new technology is emerging, the standards that we use to evaluate the technology, even the language we use, is also in flux, right? So I think I can share the way that we describe these things and define these things, which I find useful, but of course there are other valid ways of thinking about them. So to me, an AI persona ultimately is the representation of a kind of marketing persona in virtual space, right? So if you think about the kind of traditional, now it may be based on cluster analysis or a bunch of studies or whatever, but ultimately it's a kind of like aspirational persona that brands have traditionally used to structure their marketing around. So you think of like, an extreme case might be like the Mountain Dew surfer dude, whereas we all know most of the people who drink Mountain Dew are not actually like, guys with six packs on the top of waves, but it's a kind of aspirational persona. Yeah. And then at the under end of the continuum, you have personas that look a lot more like a representative segment in the world that's actually targetable, right? Mm-hmm. So that's, that was always a bit of a tension in marketing, as you know, from your marketing days. Yeah. And then I think, to me, a digital twin has a higher and more rigorous aspiration, at least in our world. And that aspiration is, number one, to be representative of the real world, which is harder than it sounds. And then number two is to be predictive. And we can talk about what being predictive means. That's like a really complicated question. Yes. But we always aspire to be representative and predictive. And to me, a persona is a kind of plausible distillation of different qualities of a person or a group of people moved into virtual space. So you can, I'm not saying it's useless, right? You can use it for ideation. It might give you some good ideas, but it's not very useful for testing or for generalizing, because you don't know how representative it is. So to me, a digital twin is all about continuous interaction with that representation of a group of people in the real world or an individual from the real world. And actually in our platform, you can chat with a segment or an individual.
Amazing. So again, I'm going to kind of like just, ask questions, because this is one of those things where you can easily fall into, you can go down very, very specific rabbit holes at the end of the day.
And so many rabbit holes.
Yeah. So like Reid Hoffman from, the co-founder of, or the founder of LinkedIn a couple of years ago, he did a video, a 14-minute video that showed his digital twin, and he had uploaded all his books in there. I know you've seen it, and he was quizzing his digital twin that had all his mannerisms, the way he talked, the way he moved his head, and he would be able to answer questions, right? To your point, that was like an example of an individual's digital twin. You're also saying about communities, or that could be representative of a community. Let's say the South Asian community, or the Hispanic community, or the college kids who live in the Southeast versus the ones who live in the Northwest. You could design digital twins for any of these situations, but how would that work for a community? Because it's hard enough to do for one person, but to do for an entire community requires a different set of criteria, I would imagine. So just walk us through, how does that work?
Yeah. Weirdly, given our approach, it's easier in some ways to create a dependable digital twin of a segment of people than it is to create a dependable digital twin of a single person. And the reason is that it's the same reason that market researchers like to look at people in aggregate, right? Or look at large populations of people, because we want to be able to make the right decisions about campaigns or new products or new creative platforms or strategies that will ultimately impact people at scale. Yeah. And at scale, people share some qualities, but not others. And our idea was like, rather than pre-building digital twins and then handing the keys to the digital twin to a client, based on a given, like a typing tool or something like that, or a particular ethnic category or gender category or regional category, what if we could spin up a digital twin that was based on a complex set of attributes? So some of them might be ethnic or regional or income-based or age-based or whatever, but others might be the kind of language they use or the emotions that they express when they encounter a particular situation in the world, or whether or not they're HubSpot users. I mean, HubSpot's our first client, so it comes to mind. And then if we take all of those attributes and we have enough underlying good quality first party data, either from the client or that we've gathered or from third-party data sets, and we can build a secure enough foundation of that segment, then we can bring that segment to life in a really credible way that's dependable, where the outputs to questions, responses to questions that like a marketer or a researcher might ask will be directionally accurate and will point them in the right direction. So we find that it would be difficult to build up, some companies are actually moving in this direction, it would be difficult to build up enough underlying knowledge of every individual that we might want to talk to. But it becomes easier if we look at subsets of individuals, segments defined by common attributes that we can cluster around. And then if it's easier to tell if we have enough good quality underlying data that's relevant. And then we can test the outputs against human outputs, like responses to questions, and against future outcomes. So both parallel testing and predictive testing.
Okay, so but I'm still kind of like trying to make sure I understand this. So if we have all these attributes, we're collecting all this data, first party data, primary research data to help construct the digital twin. Is this digital twin interactive? Number one, and number two, do you have to consistently feed it real time or the latest and greatest information to keep it current? How does that work?
So let me give you a concrete example, right? So say we're working with one of our clients, which is a global confectionery company, and we provided parts of this use case in the white paper that you read. This company had tons of data from a variety of different sources about teens in the UK and in the EU and the way they think about chewing gum, right? It's like, it sounds like a minor thing, but yeah, it's a big line of business for them. And teens, it turns out, like change their points of view about chewing gum a lot. And it turns out that they chew gum for reasons that I had no idea. Like, for instance, it helps them focus during tests. So there are all these kind of like underlying human insights that they've uncovered. They have a bunch of qual data, some IDI transcripts, focus group transcripts. They have some decks, ethnographic stuff. They also have some quantitative data, which is to say survey research and so on. So we ingested the qual and the quant data. The surveys were not run by us, they were run by others, but we have automated ways of ingesting that data on a raw basis, which is to say columns and rows basis, which is important. We saw some gaps in the data relative to the kinds of questions that the client might want to ask. So we ran a supplementary study. And then once we have all of that data, it kind of constitutes a pretty secure foundation to understand that audience relative to chewing gum. Now, you might say, if you're going to do all the human research anyway, why have a digital twin? Why not just like do the human research? But the answer is you can stretch the value of that underlying research to adjacent areas, which is to say, you don't have to do the same research every time you have a new gum innovation to test against the market, or every time you want to think about expanding that particular gum innovation, packaging innovation to a different national market or something like that. Right, and we can sort of model or give you guidelines about how much you can stretch the underlying data that you have to adjacent areas. So once you have all of it, then we need to bring the digital twin to life, which happens more or less in real time. Say you want to talk to UK teens who chew gum more than 3 times a week, who describe chewing gum as helping me focus while I'm taking a test, right? So a combination of attributes. So then you want to chat with, in real time, that segment of people and actually ask them questions about the way they think, get quantitative and qualitative responses in reply, And then you actually want to show them new propositions, whether it's a mock-up of a new product, or it's a new creative platform for your marketing strategy, or it's a new piece of content. And you want to say like, hey guys, what do you think about this? Would you like it? You know, would you click on it? How much would you pay for it? You know, does this kind of packaging thing appeal to you? And then you want to be able to get really directionally accurate responses in real time based on those inputs and based on those new propositions. And I'd say when we work with digital twins with clients, mostly it's that trajectory. It's either ingesting or gathering net new data, you know, modest in scope, not an extraordinary amount, but enough to be able to stretch where we need it to stretch so that they can interact with the digital twin in real time and get the responses that they need and embed those responses in whatever it is that they're trying to accomplish within the organization.
Right. So one question that people would probably ask is like, oh, but this is all backward-looking data. You know, it's from that's been done in the past. How do you know it's going to be predictive of the future?
Yeah.
You mentioned that representativity and predictivity are the two things that you are focused on. So help us understand, how does that actually work then?
Yeah. I think it's a really interesting question because forgive me for just I'll get to it, but take a step back, and I could ask the same question of a market researcher prior to the advent of AI. It's you know, and I know you know this. It's like you're looking at historical data. How are you making any kind of predictions based on the future? And the answer will be judgment, my ability to interpret signals in the noise through experience. I know which are signals and which are not. You know, I have a few stats-based or tricks or your heuristics I use, etc. Right? And I think the answer for digital twins is largely similar. That is, you know, to quote William Gibson, who's overused quote, like the future's already here, it's just unevenly distributed.
Yep.
So it's less about predicting the future and more about finding early signals of an emerging future. Okay. And so in order to do that, you need to get a lot right, though. So firstly, you need training data or just data that the model has available to it that contains those early signals. If the early signals aren't in that data, model's not going to do it. Secondly, you need a model that's really configured to help you find them. And thirdly is that none of this works if there's not a really collaborative relationship between human teams and digital twins, right? You need to ask the right questions. You need to know when to apply common sense and human judgment. Yeah. But to me, digital twins are ultimately just like they're like a magnifying device to help human teams discover and amplify those signals that exist in the world to help make predictions about where things are likely to go.
Right. So in that context, right, you are basically doing a couple of things. You're looking, and these are my words. I obviously have not seen your systems or anything like that, so I wouldn't know the details. But if I was solving for this, you're having to translate existing information, mine it for potential signals, categorize them to say, are these signals going to be relevant for the future or not? Because what's a signal today could be mainstream tomorrow, right? And knowing exactly how to figure that part of it out. There must be a construct or an algorithm to help you with that part of it. And then to be able to quiz the digital twin to say, I've got this idea, does it fit in that narrative of what you've got or not? And if it does, great, and the potential goes up, or no, it doesn't, and therefore it's limited. That's how my brain works in terms of breaking this down. Am I on the right track?
No, it's not a bad way of thinking about it at all. And I would just add two things. One is, you said algorithm. You can also think of it in terms of a kind of massively complex weighting challenge, right? Because say you've ingested, I don't know, 1,000 N survey or 20,000 N surveys, and then 100 in-depth interview transcripts and some, ethnographic home or store visit transcripts. It's like, where's the signal? Which sources of data are important relative to a particular query or audience or category? And then how do you make the outputs better over time such that the entire system's learning? And the second time you have a new innovation, it gives you even better, more accurate projections than the first time. And then the other thing I'd say is, I think prediction is one really good lens, but I think there's another lens that captures the value of this, which is to say, it's anchoring all of the underlying data and then kind of focalizing it through funneling it through a kind of audience segment. So it's both, it's hard to do, but it's easier than true prediction.
Yeah.
And I think that if you can see all of the data that you're swimming in an organization, including the stuff collecting dust in the waste bin, including your new stuff that you really like and you're relying on, if you can see it all through the eyes of a potential customer, and our system helps you cite the data that relates in the moment of the query to the point of view of that customer. There's nothing predictive about that. It's just a way to see the universe of data that you're sitting in the middle of in a much clearer way from the point of view of a customer. So that's the other way to think of the value, I think, of digital twins.
I get that. So in that scenario, I can see some critics saying, yeah, but you know what? I don't need the digital twin to do that. That's my job as an insights professional, client side. Or a vendor could say, you know, my job is to make sure that I bring all this stuff to my client in this particular way. Why do I need to go down this pathway versus just doing what I'm traditionally doing? And then, you know, it very quickly devolves into, you know, what's better, faster, cheaper, and all that stuff, right? That's not really the value add here, in my opinion, is it?
Well, yeah, although I would say to do that job right is traditionally excruciatingly slow and extraordinarily expensive and takes a huge degree of human knowledge and experience, number one. And number two is, I mean, the truth is that people rarely look across data sources that contain signals about the market that are differently structured in a compelling way. And that's why, you know, every CMO complains like, hey, my social team gave me an insight about, you know, the audience. My MR team use surveys, they have an insight. The CRM, there's another insight. They're incommensurable because they're all looking at the data through different lenses. And if you're just comparing like the deck from Kantar or Ipsos or whatever to the report from Brandwatch to the report from your CRM, it's like being on different planets. And our claim is that a digital twin can be helpful in the sense that if you look at the raw underlying data, you can find overlaps and patterns or disjunctures that become really important to decision making, number one. And number two is if you can do so through the lens or the point of view of the needs, evolving needs of a particular audience, that is valuable. And then if you can do that well, that enables you to have much more predictive insights about the future as well from the point of view of that particular audience. So to me, they're sort of like intertwined, and definitely that thing I just described is less like radical or transformative, except I think in the past, practically speaking, it never happened very effectively in the real world.
Yeah, no, I get that. So there are two pathways we can go at this point. One is around use cases. I do want to talk about use cases of where you've seen successful use cases and where do you see the limits of that. But before we talk about the use cases in particular, there is one other niggling thing in my head that I want to just get out there so that we can kind of like, you know, lay to rest, you know, kind of thing. You mentioned that, you know, you're ingesting data, you know, primary research data, you know, that's been done. And, you know, I'm suspecting you also have a similar sense of like, you know, it's not as if like, you know, traditional market research surveys and data is the gold standard because there's so much, let's say, variability through fraud or other mechanisms that's causing that. How are you addressing that? Because, you know, people will be saying garbage in, garbage out. This is 30% garbage. How do you know what's garbage and what's not? How are you handling all that?
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you the practical answers the way right now we're dealing with that challenge. And then the true answer is there's no perfect solution because if underlying data that you're ingesting is flawed in some way and you don't discover or correct for all of those flaws, then the outputs are going to be at least somewhat problematic. Although the first thing I'd say is that if you ingest data from different sources, that is differently structured forms of data, that's one possible way to correct for, or at least provide a more panoramic picture of the world than just ingesting, say, survey data, right? So from the beginning, we always knew that we wanted kind of quantitatively representative data, like from surveys, but we also wanted qualitative data. And then we wanted to be able to look across those different forms of data to, in some ways, correct for the inherent flaws of one versus the other. Mm-hmm. That doesn't fix the fact that, you know, the survey that somebody ran might be 30% fraudulent, obviously. But then the second thing is, if we're pressure testing the outputs from digital twins against not only the surveys that the client already has, but against A, net new research that uses like mixed methods, for instance, and B, future outcomes. That's another way to control for the problematic underlying data. That is, if the digital twins are predictive, to some degree, that means that we've ingested the right data. Not in, in absolute terms, but that's one way of checking our work, right? Yeah. And then the last thing I'd say is, honestly, we've just gotten pretty good at, through a process of beginning to work with big enterprise clients, helping them understand where good quality data is likely to be, where the hidden gold in their data that they're sort of sitting on that's now in the wastebasket is. So, for instance, brand trackers are like, I think, some of the most useful and problematic market research instruments, because they're backward looking. They've been doing the same thing, asking the same questions for years, which has an enormous amount of methodological value, but also means that there's a lot of bias. They're missing new stuff, new ways of asking questions. They're using older forms of language that respondents might not be currently using. So it's like, how do you extract the gold from a brand tracker to provide useful context without actually constraining what your digital twin can do when you're ingesting the brand tracker? So there are a lot of kind of tricks around the moment of ingestion of the data, tagging it and so on, that we're a SaaS platform, you can ingest data on your own. But when we're starting a big enterprise relationship, we always intervene a bit and say, like, hey, let us help you edit the underlying data to try to get the good stuff and not the bad stuff. But in the end, you can't, if a client has been running horrible service, and I won't mention any particular client, but sometimes we had a client say, we're going to scale this pilot if the correlation between digital twin and synthetic data outputs and our human survey is X. And if it's X, we'll give you a lot of money. It's great. We looked at their underlying survey data and we noticed that there were a lot of, like, in the open ends, like good, great, irrelevant responses that had not been cleaned out, a significant percentage. Yeah. So then you have to have that uncomfortable conversation with the client and say, like, hey, actually, let's find different benchmarks or standards. So it's not a simple answer, but we found ways to negotiate the danger.
Okay, so with that said, now let's talk use cases. Yeah. So where have you seen successful use cases with digital twins in our world? Where do you see the limits with digital twins? And what are those limits in particular? I'm just curious, if you could just give us both ends of the spectrum, that would be really helpful.
Yeah. So I think people are ready to believe, because they've seen machine learning algorithms do similar kind of work for them in the past, even before like generative AI, that something like a digital twin could tell you maybe should your banner ad be blue or red. Because there's enough training data about what happens when you use the red one or the blue one. You can, ingest some A/B testing data. Maybe there's some data about whether a particular group of people loves red or blue. That's just one stupid example. But I guess our challenge is, how can we be useful much earlier in the discovery journey, right? Yeah. So not just useful in helping you decide whether the thing should be blue or red, but also helpful in helping you decide, like, what unmet buyer needs or, tensions are really important for you to address. Mm-hmm. Which adjacent areas might you be able to play in as an organization where you have brand permission to do those things? What kinds of products or product ideas might actually be, lead to incremental growth? Mm-hmm. Those kinds of questions. So those are both, I think, much more valuable and much harder. Mm-hmm. But we found that actually we can help clients quite a bit with the, first of all, the true discovery. It's like just kind of probing audiences. And one reason is just that we make available different forms of data that, as I said, contains lots of different signals from buyers about the problems that they're facing now, through interviews or surveys or whatever.
Right.
I think, one example is like in the confectionery thing, use case that I was talking about. The client discovered that the packaging of gum was really important to teens because they shared the gum with friends, and there was like a social media kind of performative dimension, right? It sounds obvious when I say it. Yeah. So it's like, if that's the case, then you need to rethink the packaging. It's not just about convenience or catching your attention on the shelf. It's about how cool it is when you pass it to your friend, what it feels like, what the click is like, how it shows up in social media, etc. So then it's like, okay, cool, but how do we get from there all the way to a product that's commercializable?
Yeah.
Following a kind of unbroken thread of queries. And I think if you look at innovation as a process, that's helpful rather than as a kind of like one-time episodic research thing. So maybe they would have done, 80 billion rounds of focus groups and surveys in the past. And now maybe we're going to suggest that they do half as many, but higher quality, more focused rounds that are directed to some degree by what they're learning in the digital twin environment. And so if you imagine the product designers and the marketers actually in the course of their day-to-day lives making decisions with access to digital twins and getting audience or consumer-centric feedback, that's a huge win, I think, because those people quite often in the past weren't looking at any consumer data. They weren't going back to look at the PowerPoint deck delivered by the MR firm, at the beginning of the process. Yeah. So I think for like an innovation cycle where there's some amount of discovery early, where we can help with the divergence phase, which is to say coming up with good ideas. And again, it's not the platform coming up with them, it's the platform in conjunction with the human team coming up with them. Yeah. And then we can help to some degree with the convergence part, which is to say, I have 20 or 30 good ideas. For this set of good ideas, are there some barriers or hidden obstacles that I haven't considered relative to my audience? So that I'm getting down to 2 or 3 that I might want to test. And then, when you have 2 or 3 you might want to test before you actually go to market, you might want to do a human study, right? Yeah. Because you want to de-risk a little bit more than you'd be able to do with solely a digital twin. So my argument is always, you look at an overall process like product innovation or something, and you very deliberately choose your moments to invest in high quality human research. But then in between those moments, you have this incredibly valuable always on engine that allows a wide range of people in your organization to have some access to consumer feeling, sentiment, concerns.
Okay, so I get that, and it's clear that it can help with different parts of the front end of innovation cycle. Basically, I've seen that also in other ways, and this is a pretty smart way to help a team progress. Where did you see the limit?
I'll talk about 2 clients. I already told you one story about the gum innovation. I'll tell you about another one really briefly, and then I'll tell you where the limits were, in each case. And because we found those really interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
To clarify, this is not intended to, say that it's overly, problematic or anything. I think it's important for us to all understand together.
Oh yeah.
There's some places where it may be a limit today, but a year from now or 2 years from now, it may not be a limit at all because of the pace of changes happening with the technology as well, right? So
no, and to be really transparent or honest about the way we sell, we talk about limitations or less than ideal use cases all the time, and we think a lot of the value we provide is that transparency. I can't tell you the number of clients that have come to us and said, we've used X platform that is valued at $1 billion, and the outputs just they said that they could model our complex B2B audience based on whatever data they have available, and it's like no better than ChatGPT. And so we can't base decisions on that. your process sounds a little bit slower and annoying. Maybe we have to go look for the right sources of data that we already have, et cetera. But maybe that's what we need to do. So, we always want to be in a position where we're being transparent about like what a good use case is now, what will shortly, in our opinion, be a good use case, and what will never be a good use case, for these kinds of approaches. So yeah, totally. And I think that, so I gave you the gum example. Let me give you a marketing example. We go to market with McCann World Group, the big advertising company that's IPG, now Omnicom, they're all one file. And they brought us to one of their clients that's a huge global financial services company. And this McCann essentially worked with the client to create a new creative platform that is like a new way of understanding what they're doing in the world and how they're appealing to some of their customers. And this example happens to do with their B2B customers, like institutional investors, things like that. And it's really expensive to talk to an institutional investor that's senior, as as anyone listening who's in MR space knows. I'm talking like $5,000 to talk to them for like 20 minutes, like a real, not someone pretending to be one, but a real one working for like a name company with a real C-suite role and so on. So they were doing a tracker at most once a year. They weren't really able to collect much customer client feedback at scale, and certainly not very often. But they wanted this new creative platform. So they commissioned, and it was expensive, a bunch of really well done expert interviews, in-depth interviews with a bunch of these institutional investors globally. McCann helped with that, did a really good job with it. So they had whatever it was, 30, 40, 50 transcripts. They had some quantitative survey data. And then the question is, how do we get from there to a campaign into winning content faster than we ever were able to in the past? And so our answer was, okay, cool, don't stop doing the human research. That's great. But let's figure out how to ingest all of it, create a reliable digital twin of the institutional investor, such that along the way, you can ask your team, broader team, can ask questions of the McCann team and the client team, ask questions of that digital twin. So they were both really successful engagements, but we discovered limitations in the context of both. I mean, we already knew about them, but I think they're good examples to illustrate. So I would say that in the context of the gum example, the digital twins were quite good at surfacing in open ends or in human language that they were generating diverse themes, in that the themes were very similar to the themes generated by real teams, like in focus groups or expert interviews. So that was great. The language that was actually used, the texture of the language, was not good enough. So I think I presented this at a conference, and I gave ourselves like, I don't know, an A- for themes and a C for language, because there was too much repetition. The regional nuance of the language being used by the teams, for instance, in like different parts of the UK or EU, wasn't an exact match. And in the end, I'm an anthropologist, and that's like not I don't like that. I want the language to actually reflect the real language being used. But there's an enormous amount of value in replicating the themes and the diversity of themes. So we're very clear with clients about that reflecting the actual language, number one, is a work in process. It's an ongoing project in terms of our model, but it also to some degree depends on the input data or training data. And if we have more, we have more transcripts and more social media posts by teens, then we're able to like segment and cluster the language around different groups of teams much more effectively. So that's number one. And then number two is, I'd say sensory experience. I mean, this sounds obvious, but like this is how it feels or tastes, or this is the texture of a thing that I'm like chewing on, or this is what it feels like to put my thumb on the package to click it open. The digital twins need more help with that, right? It's not something they're naturally good at. So those are two limitations that felt really important for that case study. And then I think there are probably different ones for the marketing case study, but I'll pause for a minute.
I'll give you one, and I say this in complete jest, so please everybody get mad at me, but I want my digital twin to work out so I can lose the weight. It hasn't
exactly
happened. Waiting for that.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. But I'd say that's not even a bad metaphor, right? Like,
Exactly.
it's like, as an insights professional, your digital twin can't actually lift the weight for you,
Nope.
but it can work with you to create a really amazing training plan based on the experiences of thousands of other people who've tried to lose weight and get stronger.
Exactly.
And then, but in the end, you're lifting the thing. And to me, I know everyone sort of says this, but like, I think the human judgment,
Mhm.
shaped and tempered by experience and human creativity, the ability to have a kind of leap of faith, based on very little underlying data that's sometimes right,
Yeah.
is quite a human quality.
Yeah.
And I think all we're doing is providing like a more secure platform to stand on for that human to take that leap of faith.
Do you see a world where, let's say, I'm not talking at the community level, I'm not talking about
Yeah.
the individual level, a world where you've ingested source data into the digital twin, where you could actually delegate decision making to the digital twin?
Yeah. Yeah. So in some ways, we're already moving in that direction, which is to say, we have a kind of agentic system embedded in the platform.
Yeah.
So a lot of the market research kind of process moments, like create the survey, launch the survey, analyze the survey, chat with the digital twin 10 times and give me like, all of those things can be done via an agent. And in fact, already it can be like voice controlled within Panoply.
Yeah.
So all that's really, really cool. That's not exactly what you're asking. You're asking,
No.
can it make the decision and do the thing?
Yeah.
And my argument is that that's coming, but the best platforms and the best teams, there may not be platforms in the traditional sense. They may be disaggregated and kind of embedded in organizational processes in different ways, right, through MCPs or whatever. But point is that world is coming where you're going to get these iterative loops that are agentic in nature that hopefully get smarter and optimize over time. And the loop goes from like data collection to analysis to decision to action.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's coming. It's already here in some senses. But somebody asked me this question, I can't remember, another podcast or a client, like, in 3 years, what's going to define like a really good piece of technology to help market researchers? And my answer was like, it's kind of the opposite of where we've been in the past. That is, I think a good platform, a good piece of technology will introduce moments of friction and will stop those processes from being seamless, which is to say, it will set you up as a human or a human team to intervene at the right times, to slow things down and provide human judgment. Because the problem with those agentic loops is that they'll inevitably sub-optimize for goals that we don't want.
Yeah.
And this is early days, but there's a story I always like to tell where I think OpenAI was training some early LLM to play a video game. And the video game is like a boat racing game where you have to get from the starting line to the end, and you collect points along the way by doing stuff.
Yeah.
And you win if you have the most points, right? So the LLM was like, hey, actually, I don't even ever need to get to the finish line. All I need to do is drive around in a circle and light this one thing on fire over and over and over again. So from the LLM's point of view, that's awesome, right? It's getting the most points because that's what you told it to do. From a human point of view, it's not accomplishing the goal that you might want it to accomplish.
Right.
So it's like, where in that loop does the human marketer or insights professional or researcher say like, hey, hold on a minute, let's take another look at all that data. What are we really trying to accomplish here? It applies that sort of, really irreducible human judgment, and then plays with the system a little bit so that it's accomplishing the right goals. And so my answer is, a lot of companies are going to become increasingly automated and decisions are going to be largely AI driven, agentic, and so on. But the smart companies will engineer in moments of human friction and human judgment very deliberately.
So that's from an internal company perspective. I get that. From a consumer perspective, I think one of the things that I can also see happening is that you could have digital twins. The current language is more in like agents, but I think it's actually a digital twin that go do my shopping for me. It knows how I like to shop, what I shop for, And we're already seeing this whole world of agentic commerce emerge right now, with OpenAI and Google investing billions of dollars, Walmart and Target and Amazon, investing in Amazon's invested in Rufus, for example. Right. So people are already talking about this, about agent to agent shopping.
Yeah.
But for the agent to shop requires some form of understanding of the consumer or that individual. And I see is the digital twin that interim step, or is that actually going to be the step where we go in from a world of today being a passive solution where you're ingesting data for it to react to something, but I could see a world where it could go from becoming the contextual engine. It's the market research information we're giving it, and then it becomes a decision-making engine on top of that.
I mean, it's a really good question. I'd say just briefly from a organizational point of view, and then I'll talk about the kind of consumer point of view. From an organizational point of view, number one, we've already made the move in the direction of being able to ingest transaction data and behavioral data and layer that in on top of the opinion data. And I guess for obvious reasons. One is, if you care about predictive power, you have to some degree overcome the say-do gap. We all know that people don't always do what they say, number one. And number two is, if you want each loop to get smarter, you have to look at the outcome of the loop, which is to say, did you sell more of that thing? Was there incremental growth? How many new families bought it, et cetera? So, and you could say the same with like a kind of marketing, Marcom's, tech stack as well, right? It's like, did more people click on it? If that's your goal, how do we get? So that's already, I think, a move in that direction. But we haven't yet gotten to the action layer. That's still like the intelligence layer. We're also moving towards integration with action systems, right? Different bits of software that companies use to make decisions about, for instance, programmatic purchasing of ads. Right? So I think that from an organizational point of view, that world's coming, and it's going to really be a question of, like, as I said, what are the moments of human judgment that you want to apply to kind of slow things down and add some friction so you don't get really bad outcomes. From a consumer point of view, I think it could make our lives much easier, but it's also quite scary. And there's one thing I keep thinking about, and it's a thing that every market researcher has been asked, every anthropologist, right? It's like, what causes someone to change or to try something new? And to me, that, like, to some degree, you can model that, right? Because the same individual has chosen many times to try something new within a particular category. People like that person have chosen the new deodorant from the shelf. But a lot of times it's pretty ineffable. It's like, you saw the thing out of the corner of your eye, your friend liked it, it seems cool, it was pink. And it's quite hard to disaggregate all of those factors into variables, even for a very complex digital twin, that to actually decide on somebody's behalf to buy something new. So I think what you're going to get is a lot of sort of closed loops that don't change very much. And I think that the smartest platforms, smartest companies, smartest individuals will use AI to help them discover new stuff, but will ultimately use just human judgment or emotion or whatever to actually make the leap and say, like, I'm switching my beer. I hate the way I have the same beer every time. I'm going to try a new beer. I'm sick of it. So I think to get a digital twin to actually make that decision at the right moments is tough to imagine. But if it's like, I don't know, when to buy my broccoli and where to go to buy the broccoli at the best price, and find me a recipe that I might like to cook the broccoli and all of that, and then to actually go out into the world and do those things, I think that's very much coming.
I agree with that. So how about things like, do you get asked questions around, like, the ethics or the legality of having a digital twin represent a community or an individual? Because you, in a way, you're kind of like bordering on the edge, and especially with, like, GDPR in Europe and everything else like that. I see that your deal, right?
So I should say, I think it's a really important question. There are a few things we don't do. which is we never create digital twins of actual people in the world, which is to say like named people that incorporate PII or even individual respondents to surveys. Like you can continue chatting with one, but it's a composite picture that's inspired by one person's answers or several people's answers. And one thing I haven't said is that Panoply, it's not like we're only ingesting client data. We also have hundreds of millions of question answer pairs, not from clients, that we've gathered on our own or invested in. There's syndicated data sources that we can ingest and so on. So everything's kind of clustered based on different sources of data. So number one is like we don't actually reproduce, like we're not going to create the Yogesh like podcast, and compete with Yogesh.
I'm disappointed because I would help a lot sometimes, but never mind.
I know it would be pretty cool. We can work on it. That said, I think that there's a kind of informed consent issue that everyone's going to have to grapple with. Number one, and number two is like what are the terms and conditions that like brands, for instance, are signing when they hire a market research firm. Like I've since I kind of came into this world, about 4 years ago when I helped get Panoply off the ground, I was shocked to discover a lot of brands don't even know if they own the data that they've collected, with an Ipsos or a Kantar or whomever. And I'm not speaking on behalf of those companies. I'm just saying the brands have no idea. Is number one. Number two is when we say like, hey, big brand, we'd love to be able to ingest the raw data and not just the deck. They're like, how am I supposed to find that? We just look at the deck. And I think that's problematic. So from a strategy and best practice point of view, brands need to have a better sense of ownership over their data and their insights and all of that. So that's not really an ethical issue. It's just like a practical issue. In terms of the ethics of it, I think, we Panoply need to be really clear with our clients about what their data is going to do, and what it's going to be used for, who it's going to be shared with, in what form. And I think that those requirements are a lot more complex than companies and brands are used to dealing with. So for instance, like for our enterprise clients, they all exist within their own ring-fenced environments. We rely to some degree on commercial LLMs plus our own sort of self-hosted LLMs, but actually no raw data ever even travels to a commercial LLM because we're also an analysis engine on our end and everything's processed and vectorized and so on. We have certain kinds of legal agreements with the commercial LLMs. And then one thing that's increasingly important that brands care about when they know enough to ask is that, of course, no client data is ever shared with any other client. That should go without saying. But also no client data or any gains that relate in intelligence that relate to the usage of a particular client environment actually train our models.
Okay.
Yeah,
well, let me rephrase a bit. It's training the model that is related to the client, but it's not training your generic model.
That's right. The client's environment and associated models get smarter for the express benefit of the client, and not for the benefit of Panoply, and therefore for the benefit of other clients. And if I were a brand, I would ask that question of these providers. Now we get to the question of like survey respondents, say, or interviewees. And I mean, my own view is that we're very careful about the, forms of consent that people are, checking in the box and so on in terms of what their data can be used for. But I do think in the future, and I think that this will be probably a legal regulatory thing first in Europe, and then maybe eventually like in California and then in the rest of the US, depending on what kind of government we end up with. But I think that there are going to have to be national laws about the usage of data to inform AI models that purport to represent a given group of people or community, and whether or not you want your data to be ingested into those models, right, to inform them. And so, I mean, I'm all for that. I can say for now, we try to be as transparent as we can, and we follow the law. But I would say, I know this sounds a little bit like Sam Altman saying, come regulate me, and not meaning it. But I actually think that the industry would be better off if there were clear regulatory standards about levels of consent in ways that consent needs to be delivered for people's data to be used in certain ways.
I'm so glad you said that, because I think, yeah, I've had a few conversations with people who are, like leading policy work in this space, and
Yeah.
I think your voice would matter a lot, because
Yep.
you are on the forefront of a lot of things that are going on, and by recognizing these things early enough to see the value plus all the misuse or potential misuse that could happen, and to just start, bringing that to light early enough, not to create skepticism, but to bring awareness so that people understand how to then navigate and
Yeah.
manage these things.
And
I
yeah,
think that's
yeah,
highly
totally,
so.
totally. And yeah, and it's like, I think platforms, software companies tend to be quite focused on their own, growth, of course.
Yeah,
But I think that one thing I learned in my first startup is, I would always say like, like this other startup copied us. They're doing the same thing. How could they? But in early days in an industry, the growth of the category matters a lot more to the individual success of any given player than what any individual player is doing in terms of gaining an advantage over their competitor. And I think that the industry is crying out for standards around what we were talking about earlier, which is like, what the hell is a good digital twin? What's a useful one? How do I know whether or not to depend on it? And number two is regulatory and ethical standards around things like consent. And there's a third area which we haven't even discussed yet, which is really important to me, which is I think that people have a really problematic view of sources of bias in AI models. And that's especially true when it comes to digital twins, because I think you made this point earlier. Like, of course, there's bias everywhere. There's always been bias in market research. No model's perfect. No amount. There have always been underrepresented or under-listened to groups of people whose the inclusion of whose voices would actually be much better for everyone. But either hopefully rarely through outright, say, racism or sexism, but just through neglect or lack of historical data or inattention, their voices aren't included. And I think the introduction of digital twins, it's a double-edged sword, right? It's not that it introduces new biases, but if they're black boxed, they have the extreme potential to both hide and magnify existing biases. But if they're not black boxed and we see as a project, like, hey, I think this group in this market, no one's really listening to them. Like, for instance, this is before we were really focusing on digital twins. We did a project about, sort of like underrepresented minorities in video game communities who get yelled at for being women or gay or people of color or whatever, but who are otherwise just gamers and want to feel included, right?
Yeah.
So if I was doing social listening to try to understand them, their voices wouldn't be in the data because they've already been silent. So I need to go find them and actually ask them in a safe space, like, what was your experience? What did they say to you?
Yeah.
Why did you leave the community? Oh, did you actually stop playing the game? And like, hey, game companies, you're losing 10% of your audience because they've been like yelled at or discriminated. So the point is, if we were creating digital twins of underrepresented gamers who face discrimination in gaming communities, I think that would be quite admirable exercise, but we need to think really deliberately about how to fill in the data gaps and go out and listen to the humans in the real world before we did that. So yeah, it's a double-edged sword. And the anthropologist in me wants to say, if we're thinking about group identity in the way groups get represented online and the way they get subjected to disparate treatment, like the digital twin thing is really dangerous, but it's also a really amazing potential to start like fixing some things.
Yeah, and in all of this, the one thing I've not heard you say, and I just want to say this, out loud, is that you're not talking about replacing anything. You're actually augmenting everything.
Augmenting everything. Yep. I mean, like, look, I mean, maybe throughout a research process, you're doing fewer waves of human research, or maybe the sample sizes are lower. But I guess, it's funny. I was thinking of it this way the other day. It's like, okay, let's look at the world we're in now, where I think there's a dramatic over-reliance on programmatically recruited respondents to massive surveys that conceals not only a lot of fraud, but a lot of methodological laziness, where the data and the analysis are not actually that strategically useful, and people sort of rinse and repeat too much. Now, I'm not saying every insights professional does that. I'm saying it's a kind of tendency in probably in every insights function that people are trying to correct in one way or another, right? So that's world A, where you're paying 0.002 cents to talk to a random respondent about a thing, and you're asking them 500 questions and they're answering too seriously, and then by question 498 they're just like clicking through. Of course, that's an exaggeration, but not by much. So that's world one. World two is, okay, instead of having that 500 question survey that I release every month, maybe I have a shorter survey, maybe I do a little bit more qual research, and I direct my energy in a really, really focused way, informed by previous research, seen through the lens of AI. And then I layer on tools like digital twins to make myself smarter and to transform from a kind of episodic to continual approach to research. And in the end, I'd probably spend a bit less money, but I've actually invested much more in each human research project, more of my time, my team's time, and my money. So I'm getting better quality primary data, and I'm doing far more with it. And so to me, that's a much brighter, more potentially amazing world for insights professionals to be in than the one we're in right now.
100%. Adam, I don't know if you realize, but we're already over an hour. And I could have you talking for
lost track of time.
Hours.
I lost track. Yeah.
So let's do this. I would love to have you back.
Sure.
And, we can have another conversation, because I think this whole space around bias and some of the challenges of the industry is another area I know you're very passionate about. So I can very much of course there are panoply examples, but the bias thing, it's a thing I've written about quite a bit. Like I have a Newsweek article and a few others, and I really, as an anthropologist, I have a lot of ideas about what representing different groups of people ethically means. Great, because I think one of my passion projects also is around stigma and how it impacts brands. So I would love to have a conversation with you about that. For today, first of all, I want to thank you so much for your time. You've been so gracious with us in terms of sharing your thoughts and your wisdom about such an exciting technology, actually, about what's possible right now. So thank you again for being here.
Anytime. Thank you for asking the smart questions. Thank you for coming to this thing so prepared, not only with a little research that you did yesterday, but decades of thinking about this stuff. So it's a real pleasure to have a conversation with someone who understands the space and has a real point of view. And I've had a great time. And as I said, I had no idea we were over the hour. If you asked me, I would have said, I don't know, man, maybe we have half an hour left. So.
Of course. But just so you know, and for the purpose of the audience, we broadcast live on LinkedIn and on YouTube when we do these shows. And then I upload everything onto Substack and Spotify. So you'll probably have access to that probably by, latest by tomorrow morning.
Great.
And, just follow me, follow us, and, I'm sure people will be interested in reaching out to you, Adam. How can they get a hold of you, Adam? What's the best way to reach out to you?
Yeah. I mean, email is always easy, or you can find me on LinkedIn. It's Adam Bai, and I work for Panoply. You can find me that way. Please email me at adam@panoply.com, and it's PANOPLAI. And I know maybe everyone says this, but I actually really enjoy people emailing me and saying you're crazy, or I disagree with you, or how can you advocate that? You don't have to just reach out if you want to buy something from us. I'd love to really start conversations with lots of the listeners. So feel free to reach out and start one with me.
Fantastic. Well, again, thanks everyone for listening. Thank you, Adam, again. And I'll be back next Thursday with Matt. We're going to be talking about AI and some of the things that he's seeing. We're motoring along this year. Adam's already said yes to me, so I'm going to hold him to his word. I'll have him back later this year to continue the conversation on this as well. So thanks everyone. Have a great rest of the week and weekend.
Thanks, Yogesh.